Grace and peace to you through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, happy end of the church year to you. Today is Christ the King Sunday. It marks the end of the church year, which begins with Advent, and it continues with Christmas and Epiphany, Lent, Easter, Pentecost, and the time after Pentecost. On this final Sunday of the church year, we celebrate Christ as King, who rules over all creation for all time. You got a flavor of this in the readings for today, as they appropriately touch on Christ's kingship and aspects of his kingship. In the Old Testament passage, Daniel has a dream, a vision of the Ancient One, of God, giving kingship to one like a human being coming down with the clouds of heaven. Daniel's message was one which placed the fate of the world in God's hands, in God's ultimate rule. This was a word of hope for the Jews who were at the time being oppressed by a foreign ruler in the 2 centuries before Christ was born. Revelation, written after Jesus' resurrection, and in the late 1st century or early 2nd century, picks up on images from Daniel. Did you notice that when it was read? Revelation refers to him who is coming with the clouds. Notably, the passage we read comes from the introduction to Revelation. So in the very beginning of this letter, the writer stresses Christ's status as the ruler of the kings of earth, and his reign is never-ending. The writer of Revelation wants his readers to start reading his letter with the long view. Jesus was, is, and forever will be ruler of all. And then Psalm 93, a song of praise and worship that uses images of an earthly king, some which Henry illustrated for us today, to describe God. God is robed in majesty and armed with strength. The psalmist describes that God as king is mightier than any forces on earth and describes the timeless quality of God's rule, forever and forevermore. So from these texts, a picture of Christ the King begins to emerge. Christ is a king of all, always has been, and always will be, and Christ rules over any other ruler on earth. So we know Christ's kingship is timeless, and it is all-powerful. But the question arises, what is the substance of Christ's kingship? What kind of king is Jesus? So for this, we turn to the gospel for today. The gospel brings us to a pivotal scene from John's story of Jesus' road to the cross. Jesus has been brought to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, by the Jewish religious authorities. Pilate's job is to determine whether a crime has been committed, and if so, to administer the punishment that the crime demands. So in his very first words to Jesus, Pilate comes straight to the point and asks him if he is king of the Jews. In so doing, he's making a political accusation that Jesus claims to be a king in opposition to the Roman governor. Jesus, as I'm sure you noticed, answers Pilate with another question. Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me? Another way of putting it might be, why are you asking? Did you learn about me from other people, or did you learn about me on your own? This response of Jesus offers insight into another aspect of Christ's kingship. It is highly personal. Yes, Jesus is ruler of all that is, creation, and all orders of government on earth, as the other passages tell us today. But here in John, with this question to Pilate, Jesus shows us that his kingship is one that becomes known to us through personal experience with him. Had Pilate witnessed the miracles he had performed in his ministry, like the feeding of thousands or the healing of so many sick people? Had he heard the parables spoken by Jesus or his preaching of love of neighbor and care for the poor? Jesus wants to know, though he surely knew, as Jesus is God. Had Pilate had a personal experience with his ministry? For it is through experience, through personal encounter with Jesus, that one comes to know of his love and his reign in one's life. Throughout the gospel, John tells stories of people having personal encounters with Christ. In chapter 3, there is the story of Nicodemus, a story that only appears in John. Nicodemus is a Pharisee who comes to Jesus at night to ask questions about the kingdom of God. It is in the conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus that Jesus speaks the words that have become familiar to many of us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but have eternal life. Those words were spoken by Jesus only to Nicodemus. There is the story of Mary Magdalene in chapter 20, who is the first to see the resurrected Jesus and recognizes him only after he has spoken her name, Mary. And then there is the story of doubting Thomas, later in that same chapter, another encounter that appears only in the Gospel of John, in which Thomas refuses to believe in Jesus' resurrection until he sees Jesus and places his hands where his wounds have been. Later, the resurrected Jesus joins his disciples and invites Thomas to do just that, to put his fingers in his hands and in his side, and by doing so, to believe. And so now back to our gospel passage for today. Jesus is in another personal encounter, this time with Pilate, and poses the question, do you ask this question whether I am king of the Jews on your own, or because someone else told you about me? The question matters, because this is how we come to know Christ our King, through one-on-one encounter with him. We come to know him in our times of need, when Christ gives comfort, in our times of worry and guilt over a sin committed, and Christ's assurance of salvation, in our times of stress and anxiety, and Christ provides a kind of peace only he can give. Think about that for a moment. Christ, King over all creation, comes to be known to us in the personal encounter with each of us, just as he did with Nicodemus, Mary, and Thomas. In this personal encounter, we come to know Jesus as King, but we also come to know ourselves as children of God. As I thought about this, that we come to know who we are in the personal encounter, I was reminded of my own personal encounter with a political leader once. My junior year of college, I interned for a senator in Washington, D.C. And in my first days at his office, I was invited to meet with him, as anyone was invited to do so who worked in the office. As you can imagine, I was very nervous. I had never met a senator before, and I really had such great respect for him. I met with him in his office between press calls and was struck at how much of our conversation was about me. The senator wanted to know where I was from, what I was studying, why I wanted to be there in D.C. working in his office. Here was a person of great political power, encouraging me and helping me to find a place in the work of his office. That fall, the senator put aside more time to meet with the interns, to catch up with us about the work we were doing, and to see if we had any questions for advice. So does this encounter with the senator have anything to say on the kind of encounter each of us has with Christ the King? Obviously, it cannot wholly compare, but it does illustrate some of the dynamic at work. The senator with state, federal, global responsibilities recognized the value and worth of interns, the lowest on the totem pole. The senator made our conversation about me, about helping me find a place and purpose in the much, much larger political world. Now multiply the power and rule of a senator by the largest number you can think of and apply it to Jesus. This Jesus, ruler of all, seeks an encounter with each of us personally, individually. Jesus sees the value of each and every one of us as a child of God. A second aspect of Christ's kingship that this passage teaches has to do with the sort of kingdom over which Christ rules. In his exchange with Pilate, Jesus tells Pilate that his kingdom is not of this world. I have to believe that at this point in the conversation, Pilate is becoming confused and thinking, what in the world is this guy talking about? Which is actually a fair question, because Jesus is not talking about anything in this world. The questions that Pilate are asking just don't apply to Jesus. It's like an apple speaking to an orange. Pilate is speaking of rule on an earthly level, and Jesus is speaking of rule on a wholly different cosmic one. I'm not of this realm. I am an entirely different plane than this, says Jesus. I'm a different kind of king with a different kind of kingdom. This is unsettling and hard to understand. I'm sure Pilate thought that. Here, Jesus reminds us of the timeless and all-powerful dimension of his kingship, those we caught glimpses of in the Daniel and Revelation passages earlier. It's unsettling and hard to comprehend. It certainly was for people of Jesus' time. Early in the Gospel, John tells the story of how Jesus performed the miracle of feeding 5,000 people. The people believed Jesus to be the Messianic king who would liberate them from Roman rule. Jesus, knowing that the people were about to come and take him by force and make him king, went away to the mountains by himself. The story shows that the people just didn't get it. Jesus' mission was not to become king in an earthly sense, but a king that liberates us from sin and then frees us to spread God's love in the world. This differentness of Jesus' kingdom, though, doesn't mean that we, as a part of that kingdom, are removed from the world, somehow that we disengage from this earthly world. On the contrary, as members of Jesus' kingdom, we are meant to engage in the world, that we act in ways that are motivated by the love and grace that we've come to know through Christ the King. Some of you may be familiar with Rowan Williams. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 2000s, 2002 to 2012, and the author of many books on the Christian life. In a great little book entitled Being Christian, he explains some fundamentals of Christianity. In his explanation of baptism, Williams describes the new identity that a person takes on after being baptized. To explore this, he looks to the titles that the church uses for Christ: prophet, priest, and king, and describes how the baptized person aims to imitate Christ in these ways. Williams reminds that in ancient Israel, the king had the freedom to shape the law and justice of his society. Accordingly, as a baptized person, we have the royal calling, William writes, to freely engage in shaping our lives and our human environment in the direction of God's justice, showing in our relationship and our engagement with the world something of God's own freedom, God's own liberty to heal and restore. William's words help to situate Christ's kingdom in relation to our earthly one. Christ's kingdom, which is not of this world, is a kingdom in which we find forgiveness, love, grace, and freedom, which then motivates our actions in our worldly life. Our place in God's kingdom is the reason we act the way we do in our relationships with one another and the larger world. So far, then, this dialogue between Pilate and Jesus shows that Jesus' kingship is one of personal encounter and that his kingdom is not of this world. The final thing we'll look at today is how the dialogue shows us the content of his kingdom, the people that make up his kingdom. People's citizenship in his kingdom is not based on their ethnicity or on an imperial occupation of their territory, which can form the basis for citizenship in our own earthly space. Instead, Jesus explains his kingdom is made up of those who listen to my voice. This phrase, listen to my voice, I'm wondering how many parents out there have used this one with their children. I know I have. I used it when I feel I haven't been heard, or when what I have to say is super important. Hey, listen to my voice, to the words coming out of my mouth. Here, Jesus reveals another aspect of his kingship. It is one of relationship in which Christ the King speaks, and we listen. Jesus has used this phrase, listen to my voice, earlier in John when Jesus is teaching about himself as the Good Shepherd. In this teaching, Jesus says, I am the Good Shepherd, and I lay down my life for the sheep. The sheep listen to my voice and follow me. Christ's kingship is not one of coercion. It is one of relationship, of listening and knowing his voice and following. Listening, as it turns out, is pretty hard sometimes. We know this to be true from our daily living and experience. In a New York Times article titled The Science and Art of Listening from 2012, writer Seth Horowitz explains the science of hearing and the difference between hearing and listening. He describes how the sense of hearing developed as our alarm system. It operates so much quicker than vision and even works while we're asleep. While it might take you a full second to notice something out of the corner of your eye, Horowitz writes, turn your head toward it, recognize it, and respond to it, the same reaction to a new or sudden sound happens at least 10 times as fast. So hearing, in short, is easy, but listening requires attention. He continues, but really listening is hard when potential distractions are leaping into your ears every 50,000th of a second, that's crazy, and pathways in your brain are just waiting to interrupt your focus to warn you of potential dangers. Listening is a skill that we're in danger of losing in a world of digital distraction and information overload. It's important to realize that the noisiness in our lives just doesn't get in the way of listening to one another. But it can get in our way of listening to Jesus too. And yet it is in listening to him that we come to know him as King. It begs each of us to ask, how can I better listen to Jesus' voice? Whether it's putting aside time to read and meditate on Scripture, or to come to Christ in prayer, to give attention to the words Christ speaks, Jesus' words that enable us to know him as King, who is also our Good Shepherd. This exchange between Jesus and Pilate shows us these characteristics of Christ's kingship, which we celebrate today. Christ is the King who comes to each one of us personally, the King who is focused specifically and particularly on you. Christ's kingdom is not of this world. Christ as King liberates us from sin and then frees us to live in love and justice in our relationships and our world. And Christ's kingdom is made up of those who listen to his voice. As we come to know Christ as King, we come to know him as a king, a ruler that is wholly different than any other. This difference can be jarring. How to conceive of a king who is ruler of the cosmos and yet comes to each one of us personally, in relationship. As we conclude our church year today, and we look forward to our next season of Advent, in which we prepare for the birth of this King in a lowly manger, let us look forward to that season as a season of encounter, as a season of relationship with the King who loves us so much, he came